Hi, folks. Trisha Curtis, CEO of PetroNerds and host of the PetroNerds podcast. Today is Saturday, February 22nd, 2025. This is your bonus episode. This is the Q&A session I had after the SPE Midland talk that I gave. So you just saw or just listened to episode 126 of the PetroNerds podcast, and this is the bonus episode that goes with that. So this was a deep dive, hour-long presentation and talk that I gave post-election on November 19th on geopolitics, oil, and the economy, post-election rip on November 19, 2024. And this is the Q&A session that followed that. This is just your bonus episode. So thank you guys so much for listening. As a reminder, the last podcast was sponsored graciously by Efficient Markets, formerly also known as EnergyNet, and Chris Atherton. He was just on the podcast. It's a phenomenal conversation, episode 125. Thank you guys so much for listening. Again, please tune in to episode 126, and there's a lot more coming down the pipeline, folks. Talk to you soon. Get PetroNerdy with PetroNerds. Bye.
I mean, the first question was about the, again, energy transition, because even during the first Trump presidency, we saw Wall Street, the sentiment and Wall Street investors leaving the oil and gas, going to support the oil, the green energy. So, and my question was, okay, will Wall Street now sentiment is changing towards oil and gas, or still, regardless of what the regulations is going to be during the Trump second presidency, is Wall Street going to come back to the oil and gas or not?
And I think it's. I don't think you had sentiment shifting out of oil and gas, particularly shale, during Trump, because a lot of companies weren't profitable and people had bled a lot of money. But they weren't going into. Wind and solar has never made money. So utilities, you can see, because utilities have passed along massive rate increases to the consumer, and because they have not gotten in any trouble by the administration, and because they're basically allowed to do whatever they want, and they can shove in this wind and solar, and they can pay. I mean, the consumer's paying for everything. So utilities done well, but in terms of were wind and solar ever doing well? They weren't. Standalone, they just weren't doing well. So I would say it was it's more about the margins and performance that operators how they were doing. Now they're more profitable than they've ever been. And extremely resilient. So I think we have a much more resilient shale sector. And I think that we will see that in terms of, if you say, hey, we're open for business, even the people that are against oil and gas might want in their portfolio, because it's profitable. And so if you have more analytical coverage of, I think, oil and gas stocks in the market, and just oil and gas in general, and just traditional fuels, it's going to make people more comfortable investing. And then the U.S. is going to be that bright spot in the developed world where you can invest in oil and gas, at least. And hopefully, and I do think that this administration will look to make things more sticky. They're not going to want all this repealed in 4 years, and I think that's where infrastructure matters a great deal. And I think that building out the pipeline, but truthfully think about natural gas is like a pipeline. Like if I'm doing an oil play and I overbuild my pipeline capacity, I want that for natural gas as well, so that I can have all that natural gas flourish and thrive, and that it can get exported. And we don't have that redundancy yet in the system. So it's stuff like that when you do that, and that sends signals to investors. Even right now, we're hearing a lot of positive talk about nuclear. We're seeing the nuclear stocks move. That's going to take a long time to get built, if ever, but you're still seeing that impetus and that positive talk behind it. Chris Wright is very knowledgeable on nuclear as well, and pro-nuclear. But I mean, there's difference between what you can do, and in oil and gas, it's very, very tangible, and it's easy to increase. And something I do hear and see in the industry is I feel that I'm getting skepticism from folks in the industry of how much they can increase production, or I kind of feel that. I'm not sure if that's correct. I disagree with that, because I think a lot of people just look at what they can do and say, how much running we have. Collectively, y'all have added a lot of production, and incrementally you can add more production. So I think if you just think about that, and how many, if you look on a map and you say, how many sticks do I have left to drill, how many wells do I have left to drill, and you look at the map, it looks pretty crowded. Yeah. But when you go out to the field, it doesn't feel that way. If I'm in the heart of, where I'm drilling as well. So I think of the tens of thousands of wells left to drill just in the Midland alone, all that stuff I think incrementally can add.
Sure. Just if I can add one question. I mean, during Trump, we are not going to see $80 oil price. But what do you think Trump would prefer to have an oil price?
So president can't control, just like, I mean, no president, no leader probably wants to see $80 oil price except for the Saudis and folks in the Middle East. And actually even they should not want $80 oil right now because the global economy is not healthy enough for it. So Biden didn't want 80. Trump probably doesn't want 80 either. And it doesn't mean you could have global externalities, you could have geopolitical, you could have more wars rip, you could have it. I don't think he's targeting a price. Obviously, when you're pro production and you have less regulation, you can promote production. So, and that's again where I come back to the industry. I think the industry has to be cognizant that private operators do respond to price, but they're going to respond a little bit to the regulations as well, where you can just do business, where you don't have to fight to get like if I'm able to build out gas compression, if I'm able to build up pipelines, if I can just do business and I have less of a burden. And so if I have a little lower oil prices, but I have less regulation, I have more flexibility on federal land, you tee up America to be just more resilient production base. So I would say $70 oil. I don't think he's going to want higher, but targeting it is one thing. I mean, I would like folks around Trump to be talking to him that too low is not good, too high is not too good. And you have levers within the SBR, and you have to build, to basically refill the SBR. It's not easy, it's not perfect, right? But you can put a floor on prices, and you can say, yeah, $80 oil is too high. You can see it pretty quickly in the economy when prices are too high. And we're probably at that level where is the health of the economy when I'm looking at diesel demand, when I'm looking at these things. I don't know how supportive even the U.S. economy is of significantly higher oil prices. And that's something that the oil and gas industry needs to appreciate. And they need to be honest too. Public companies want higher margins, but private companies are doing great right now. As in, they're getting better margins than they were before. So in publics are as well. And a lot of these folks, we tend as an industry actually we get better every time. When there's pressure on the industry, we actually get better. We're drilling with less rigs, we're drilling longer laterals, and we're executing better. And that's why you're seeing the production productivity so well, is because you're just doing better. So I think that knowledge and that understanding of getting kind of nerdy on the shale side, and if folks in Washington can really understand that and realize that it's a nuanced picture, and yeah, you don't want $50 oil and you don't want $80 oil, so hang out where you're at.
Well, 70 is good, but not 50.
You mentioned you like Exxon, and what do you think? Who do you think will prevail between Exxon and Chevron in the Guyana? Do you keep
and
up
who
with
will
that?
prevail?
Yeah.
In terms of,
Exxon is saying that they have the preferential right to purchase. Chevron said, well, we're buying all of Hess, so we get Hess's interest, and it's tied up in arbitration until next year.
So
I don't know if you.
I mean, they're both in I'm not intimately familiar with who has more legal. Clearly, it's not decided already. So who is going to have legal, or I didn't realize they were overlapping. So I mean, I'd have to get back to you on that one if they're overlapping interests. I think that the Venezuela issues though of sanctioning Venezuela are pretty significant. So the Trump administration, they will probably sanction Venezuela so they can make sure that they don't keep doing their threatening things to Guyana. So it's huge. The production looks really good. It's off to the races and it looks great. But it's.
But do you think the U.S. will continue to allow, for example, Chevron to operate in Venezuela? Or do you think that, because they're operating right now, so what's going to happen as far as sanctions and restrictions?
I think they should, personally, if I was doing it, I would say that they should probably, they should restrict them. So if you're going to sanction Venezuela, U.S. oil companies shouldn't get a pass on it. So you should say, no, we're sanctioning Venezuela, and that's going to impact your production, which then incentivizes them to be doing more in the U.S. and doing it in safer places. If Venezuela needs the sanctions, which they probably do, because every time they do something, they have to put them back, or they take them off, they have to put them back on. So that'll be, I would, just to wager a guess, I would guess that Trump would allow them to, but I don't know. That's 50-50 on who's advising him, how he feels about it, and what it looks like. That's a good question.
Also, do you think that the U.S. is going to invest in a different refinery? Because right now you have to mix our crude with heavier crude, right, to be able to refine it. And if you were to overhaul the refinery so that you could just refine our crude, which is a lot lighter, it would be a huge investment, correct? Am I saying?
Yeah.
Is that coherent?
No.
Has the U.S. looked into that at all, or are we still thinking let's continue to buy this heavier crude from Canada or South America or wherever else they're getting it from?
So you don't want to, firstly, refining is relatively complex. It's a great part of the industry. It doesn't get a lot of love and attention, but we have enough. So firstly, we have enough refining capacity in the U.S. We just can't lose any more. So just like needing LNG export capacity, think about the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, a big portion of that is like the reason we're so resilient as a country is because we have massive amount of oil production, we have an SPR that we need to refill, but we also have 18 million barrels a day refining capacity. So we lost some during COVID, particularly in California because they're very anti-oil and gas, and so we lost it. So we need to make sure we don't lose any more. But you do hear a lot of folks in the industry always, and they've said this for years since I started on the businesses, we need to build more refineries. Well, like we don't actually need to build more refineries because we have the capacity. So you can try, and folks try to do it in North Dakota. You really have to have refineries that are built near major consumption centers or the ability to export. And I showed you that we were exporting 2 million barrels a day of propane, and we're exporting almost 2 million barrels a day of diesel. And that's great for the refinery because it allows these refineries to run flat out, and then they can export this product. Now I get a bit of a different crude, like refined product slate when I'm refining heavy crude versus light crude. And technically, actually, any refinery can actually refine any crude. Now, how much they make and how good they are is different. So we have made it very, very difficult to build a new refinery in the U.S., so you have to have all kinds of permitting. And then what was really big during Obama was that we were raising all this oil and gas production. We had all this oil production. It was really light sweet. And the refineries needed to expand to take in more of it. And the regulations and the burdens were so onerous that they couldn't do a good job because they have all this light sweet crude. So they have all these light ends, a lot of like gasoline blending things. When you're refining light sweet crude, you get all these light ends. You have to deal with it. You have to put it someplace in your refinery. And so we did see Exxon and Chevron and a lot of them expand. They put a lot of money and they expanded the refineries. But we have this amazing complex refining base in the U.S. And so we have a massive amount of coking capacity in the Gulf Coast. Some of the most complex refineries in the world are in the Gulf Coast. And so we can refine heavy crude. So we can just take that heavy crude from Canada. Often we can get it at a discount, and then you refine it, and you get this, coke. It's a heavier, goopy crude. You mix it with condensate, you send it down. They split out that condensate, but that heavier crude you can get a little bit more diesel out of it. But you can refine that bottom of the barrel, and so you can end up getting more goody out of the bottom of the barrel. But you have to invest in that coking capacity. So this comes back down to thinking like you have to give like the ability and to say you can invest here. And so these refineries had to make this massive billions of dollars of upfront investment for this coking capacity to know that they were going to get this crude. Now, Keystone XL, I wrote about it and worked on it before it was a topical issue at all, before everyone even knew about it. And it was just a pipeline at the time. And then it became controversial, and then Obama weighed in. But what happened was Enbridge just built they just went around them. And so really we just screwed over TransCanada, and we gave all the market to Enbridge, and so they moved around. And then we built enough capacity, and we got Dakota Access got built, and so it gave North Dakota some pipeline redundancy, and it moved around the system. But it's refineries have to have access to crude and pipeline. They have to be able to, if they need to expand. But I don't think we need outright more. We just have the ability to do business. And then having ample and healthy refining capacity is really important because you just don't have if you have to supply your allies if you have any kind of national incident or international incident, you have to have jet fuel, you have to have diesel, and you have to be able to supply allies with that stuff. So it's almost SPR is as important as refined capacity. So it's a little bit more complicated, but yes, we have plenty of capacity. Wouldn't hurt to have a little bit more. Wouldn't always hurt to have a little bit more, but you have to realize refining margins are very thin. So if you have too much and they're running flat out, then you just decimate these guys and they can't make money either.
Interesting.
Do you follow M&A a lot in your the mini charts, which I appreciate very much? It really does tell a story. And I know a lot of that's going on right now in Permian, but it's also going on across the globe. Is that, do you see trends there is it just opportunistic, or is it more of a strategic thing?
I think they're both. I mean, no one's doing M&A for kicks and giggles, so they're really doing it, especially if they're public, right? That I'm gonna, a lot of times the public markets don't love it when you buy a company, but they're doing it because it's the right price. The multiples are good. You may see less I mean, in theory, we could have lower prices, slightly lower prices, but actually the multiples might be a little better, right? And so, and you should, under this administration, you should have a shift where if sentiment shifts, the multiple should be better because you're better evaluating, you're appropriately evaluating these assets, just an acknowledgement globally.
Not so much distortion.
Yeah,
from the-
oil and gas has a long-term future, or it's going to be in the economy. So that the multiple should be higher, and that will discourage M&A to a degree. Where and I think honestly, like, I love free markets. I love folks doing stuff, but I'm not for, and I was critical. I say, like, I like Exxon. I'm very critical of the CEO. I don't like what he said. I didn't like what he said. He's not correct what he said before the election, that the election wouldn't matter to oil and gas in the U.S. Absolutely would matter. He knew that. Interesting that he said that. He was playing both sides, and really interesting that he came out in the Wall Street Journal and said, we shouldn't pull the Paris Climate Accords. I don't really know what he's doing other than maybe he's got some friends or something. Yeah, I know, it's not a good look. It's not also, you could just say it's silent on it, but it's also not correct. It's just a really incorrect assumption. So I think that I don't want just big companies running this industry. I mean, the role of private companies, the role of smaller operators is huge because they're the really big backbone of this industry, but also a component of just the thriving sector in the economy, de-risking acreage and everything. So that's a great question. I think you may have a little bit less given the multiples, but abroad you could have more. If we have a decoupling of that, you might have a little bit more.
A little more complicated with governments involved.
Yep.
Where you got things happening that way.
Yep.
Your one chart or one map that showed the concentration of majors versus the privates pushing out on the edges and being able to take higher risk to do things a little bit differently. Of course, they don't typically have the R&D type budget to do those things, but they might have the entrepreneurial spirit to go for it. So
They do it on the fly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that is really, I mean, I've had so many people in the last couple of years that have kind of had just like, oh, it's over, the big guys will come in and buy it up, and that's it. And I thought, like, really? Like, we've been around long enough, we know that that's actually not the case because, now, and it would have looked differently. Under Harris administration, you would have just seen more of the same, so you would have seen a lot of stuff dry up. But now, you have an opportunity, you're going to have more opportunity in federal land, and so, yes, prices may be lower, but companies will take risks. There are plenty of companies, I guarantee you, that are going to say, I have less regulation. I have access to federal land. Prices are what prices are. I'll deal with that when the time comes. But right now, I'm gonna get the capital. I'm gonna deploy. And yes, I might go target more gassy, more liquids rich, gassier stuff, more higher NGLs, something like that. And that is where, I can't emphasize that enough. Is that's where people like. If you're stepping out and you're stepping out of the core and you're doing that, you tend to find other, like, when you find gas, there's a little bit of oil with it, not the same, but like I have a lot of gas where I have oil, and so the rising tide kind of lifts all boats, and it does increase output, and that's where I think, like, if you're banking on U.S. production declining, you are in the wrong, like, this is not the place to be because it's not going to decline.
Well, clearly you bring a lot of energy to the topic, and appreciate that very much. Always enjoyed your podcast, and thank you for that. So I'm going to ask a question that's not directly related to oil and gas, maybe, but what does Trish like to do in her own time?
People love to ask that question. And it's probably because they think I'm all consuming. I do live, eat, and breathe it, so I love this stuff. And to be good at it, you kind of have to do it. And I care about people giving me their time, so I take it really seriously. And I'm beyond grateful that this is what I get to do for a living. It hasn't been easy, but I wake up in the morning and I'm happy and I'm pumped. And it can be really hard to actually make a living. Last year was tough, but it's a great job. And for fun, I'm really close to my family. So I don't have kids. I've been married and divorced, so I've done that whole thing. COVID was fun. Lost my job with Anschutz, so I've been through the ringer. Had to really double down on my business in 2020. Just lots of stuff. But my nieces I have two older sisters. Very close to my folks and my siblings, and I have three nieces and a nephew, and they're my world. And like they know a lot about energy, and a lot about economics, and they're kind of inundated with it. So they're really smart kids. I was in Gillette visiting a coal mine, and one of my nieces with me, and I took her to dinner with me with these out-of-state legislators, and she met the governor of Wyoming, and it was great. And they were like, wow, she's 14, and she was like, she's holding court at dinner. It was awesome. And they're like, you really like, and she was telling everybody, she's like, oh man, we talk about energy all the time. And they're like, you like it? And she's like, oh yeah. So that was really cool. So they're my world. But I say family. I have a German Shepherd. He's like he's like an aggressive boyfriend where he's a sexist. He doesn't like men very much. He's very barky. He's a serious watchdog. He's my baby. He's my world, and he's my best friend, and he's awesome. He does get along with boyfriends, so that's good. But he's like loves my nieces. Doesn't like men. Everybody is terrified in my neighborhood of this dog because he barks at everyone. And I like fires a lot. I'm a pyro. And yeah, that's. I'm big on Christmas, so I'm pretty pumped about the season. Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I'm always interested about the personality behind, just not to be, this sounds kind of bad, but I'm always interested about the characters in our industry, the stories behind the stories about the people that push forward our industry. It's always intriguing.
Yeah, it matters. I mean, the personal side, and I say this because I had this reporter asking me about Chris Wright, and I can say this because I really do. I know him. I've known him, and really honored to be a friend and colleague with him. But he's been there for me when I've just needed it, and I can say he's a man of his word. He puts his money where his mouth is, and he's a deeply caring individual. So even if I didn't agree with him on stuff, but I mean, he's so knowledgeable about this stuff, and there's very few people, honestly, that know this stuff cold. And he's one of those that, and we will share data and nerd back and forth and everything. During COVID, we were swapping charts of oil demand all the time. But I mean, I can say that. So I do think personal character matters a lot.
I didn't even know that about him until you said it, and I had to look. I had to look him up in Google to see who is Chris Wright. I had never heard of him.
He's given presentations at Tudor, Picker, and Holt conferences.
Yep.
And I mean, just his humanitarian side of him. The things he's done for Africa. He has a drilling program for water wells and providing energy to them as well. But I did have a question. So I've had conversations with the Rice brothers, and really was interested in the Rice Energy, and then Toby took over EQT, and 80% or 90% of their employment actually work from home. And as you were saying, it's a thing of the past. It's not efficient, and really, I mean, that's their whole crux, is being more efficient and not being like a dinosaur and a wasteful, company and things like that. But now we see all these mergers and acquisitions. I mean, do you think that the Chevrons, Conocos, and the Exxons are going to be more efficient moving forward? And even though we see layoffs happening, but are they just going to hire another buddy, or is it going to be really buckle down and be more efficient?
So those are great questions. And I know Toby Rice as well. He's I don't agree with him on, and he knows this, of everything on CO2 emissions. We have different angles, but he has a lot of passion. He's a really hardworking individual, and I've been to their office, and I have a lot of respect for him. So he's been on the podcast, and I every time I see him, we always we banter back and forth, but great guy. So they not every company is the same, and largely I was talking about federal government. For example, in Washington, D.C., under this administration, since COVID, people have not come back to work. A lot of people are still working from home. And you see in Denver, I do think there's a lot of efficiencies, a lot of businesses. Not everyone is more productive at home. I've worked from home before it was a thing. And, it depends on the person, it depends on what you're doing and your ability to do it. And I'm not saying it's good or bad for different individuals, but clearly, when people are driving and getting groceries and there's traffic at 11 o'clock in Denver, traffic at noon, traffic at 2 o'clock, people are not working. They're driving and getting groceries. So I know it's not productivity, it's called not working. So that's a problem. And I think that's real when you have Elon Musk, when you have, I've seen CEOs from UPS to CVS, they all are bringing people back because they have a problem with the people who are working from home and are managers not fully working, and the people who are actually working who are kind of pissed. And they've got labor, all kinds of issues with that. So almost everybody from a leadership standpoint is trying to bring people back into the office. And a lot of them, I think the CVS had trouble with it, but UPS basically just said, if you're not coming back, you don't have a job. And I think that's important. A lot of people are saying this now. And I know this because I worked at Anschutz and was working in the office a couple days a week, and yeah, you do like, I basically did meetings for 2 days, and then I'd be like, go home at night, and I'd be like, this is cool. I had the meetings, with all the people, but now I got to go home and actually work and do the work. So to me, it's silly. If somebody's just going to show face, that's one thing. So it's all about the individual. And I think Toby has built a company where he talks about the young people a lot, and that's great. He's got the right people, they're doing it. So you see that, and that usually works out. Bigger companies, let's just, like an Exxon, Chevron, I've never worked for Exxon. Okay, they donated to the nonprofit I was with, and so I would go out to Dallas and I briefed them a lot. I met their chief economist, briefed their chief economist, would talk to him when I was in my 20s. I thought it was impressive that they, even had people come listen to me when I was much younger. And but they're a really big company. Like, it's very, very hard to even penetrate the company to get a contract or anything. So inevitably, I always liken big oil company to government. It's hard to it's going to have inefficiencies. So could they do better? 100%. Absolutely. If you were that big, I guarantee you can do better. Now, but that also means that, like the government, they have money and capital to burn. They can spend it on innovation. They can tinker with things. They can test things. And so when they want to go out and execute and mow down a pad and drill 100 wells, that's fun. That's interesting. That's exciting. That's fun. They're going to have a lot of capacity. I think that, but you're going to have consolidation in the business, because when you're drilling longer laterals and you're drilling less wells, you need less people. And less rigs, but this was a trajectory, we saw this coming, right, of less people. And I worked for some hospitality companies and knew that. It wasn't a good story, but it was the story. Hey, less people mean less beds, and this is a reality. Now, the industry, but I mean, there is a lot of running room left in the industry. Like, I would love to buy a bunch of production. Thinking about 4 mile long laterals, who is equipped? Who has the production knowledge? They don't, because it's so new, to really enhance the production out of that 4 mile long lateral. I was sitting next to somebody on the plane on the way here, and we were talking about, he's with frac string, and we were talking about the longer laterals, and I was like, well, the data actually shows, no matter how I spin the data, the productivity is holding up. So that means when you're drilling, like, you're staying in zone, which we always get better with that. So we're drilling in zone, we're drilling better rock, which means if we're staying a little bit better in zone, our frac's a little bit better, but all of that gets a little bit better. And the service sector has just really, really outperformed. Really, 2023 and 2024, the service sector came into its own and has helped a lot of the pressure that the upstream guys have put on. So we're performing there, but I mean, there's a lot of goodie left in that 4 mile long lateral that when that goes into production, those companies have left it, forgotten about it, and really they should put some pumpers on there that don't cost very much money. $150,000 a year for a pumper, that's decent pay, and I can just have them tinker with those wells and get more oil out. It's free. It's almost like that's free money that they're not paying attention to. So I think the tail shouldn't be as much of a decline, probably more. And then as we, in the years, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, when I'm drilling that 4 mile, 5 mile long lateral, I should incrementally get a little more output, because I'm probably completing the toe of that a little bit better. And so all that really shows there's just actually more upside. And then we could just pretend that oil's done and we have no wells left to drill. Then we're talking refracs. Then we're talking going back into existing wells, and we're just talking getting more out. And I think that's, again, and I think what Chris Wright brings to the table is this type of nerdy knowledge that of this is not a one and done game. The U.S. is not done. And that really is important, because you have to be explaining this stuff to people all over the world. I got way off topic from your question, but
we're zoning in.
doing the weave, as Trump calls it, whatever. I think the slides help with that weave a little bit, because he can weave and come back. But anyways, the people, yes, I would say just I think the M&A question was really interesting, because what's going to happen to Exxon and Chevron? They have to be held accountable to keep really good people and do a good job. I noticed Aaron Hunter, who's my friend with Conoco, who came from Concho. Keeping
Chevron before that.
Yeah. But keeping people like that and keeping a lot of the Concho team, if you get rid of all that, then you got rid of what you bought the company for. So you need to keep that, and you have to keep that innovative and the ability. So I think we're going to go through ebbs and flows, whether Chevron and Exxon keep that. They're going to get comfortable, and they're going to probably lose it, and then they'll have to go back and do it again. I mean, can they really keep it? We'll see. It depends on that leadership. And right now, I am a little bit got a question mark on that leadership right now, at least for Exxon.
Thank you very much for your time. I got to run.
Yep.
Appreciate it so much.
You guys don't have to stay, by the way.
No,
I'm just saying,
thank
yeah.
you.
With all the gas demand in the world and gas strip prices, of course, going up for the gas. But I'm sure that you know about the gas story in the Permian, where the gas is being below freezing. So the question is, would you buy gas assets at this time in the Permian?
I would.
You would invest.
Yeah, you know, but if you had to, and I have clients ask me this all the time, like if you had 10 million, where would you invest in? I'd say all day long oil. I'll put 10 million in oil all day long for the rest of my life. However, if you say, do you want to take some more risk and I'll give you another 5 or 10 million, absolutely not gas. And that's because if you're knowledgeable enough, you can play it. I think it's, for the long term, I'm very, very comfortable with nat gas.
Exactly.
In the shorter term, it's harder because I have a lot of production and I got to get all my ducks in a row. And that's why I say the infrastructure piece matters so, so much, because I have to get all those ducks in a row and I have to be able to invest. And if I can't invest, then I've got a problem. So I think in the short term, I've got some issues with nat gas. Potentially, and I've got to bring more nat gas into the grid. I've got to export more. That takes a little time, but that means that I might have some good entry points now. And then how long can I hold on to that? So it depends on, am I buying minerals? Am I buying production? Like, there's a lot of different things to execute. But also the market has to understand it. And I do think you think oil is already hard to understand, and it's a cleaner, easier, more transparent market. Gas is much more nuanced, and we don't hear, when Toby Rice gets asked to come on CNBC, it is so frustrating to me that he's on CNBC, but he doesn't get to actually, like, they ask him about energy transition, and he's supposed to be talking about natural gas prices, and that's not what he ends up talking about. So we have to have the market do a better job of covering this stuff as well.
So what's short term for you?
18 months.
18.
Yeah.
This is when we have finished the pipelines.
I mean, I'm just saying short term. If you're asking me if I was going to invest 10 million, yeah, from an investment standpoint, I'd say short term is 18 months.
Right?
Have you been watching Oxy stock, or really any story around that? So I think about 2 years ago there was a couple puts and calls on Oxy that was going to signal that before the election or around election time, their stock price was going to plummet.
Yeah.
And
Warren Buffett.
and that's what happened. I mean, I had bought a bunch of stock and then it declined 20%. Now it's going to go back up 25% supposedly. But they've split their books where they're not even sharing business revenues from half of their oil and gas assets. When you say as far as like stocks being analyzed and having the right price point on them, I mean, Oxy's a clear example of they're manipulating it 100%. They're hiding half their purse, and then they have all this clean energy that they're dumping research into, research money, and receiving government funding from. So it's just like,
well, this is where I think, and maybe where Exxon they didn't want to pull out of the Paris Climate Accords because they wanted some of those subsidies and everything. Well, those help big boys. They don't help the small guys, because if the small guys are smart, they're not going to be doing that. And something I said in Oklahoma and made everybody laugh last week, because I said, talk about tailwinds and headwinds. I remember when drill bit companies were like calling me, like everybody and their dog, when Biden got elected, everybody in the industry lost their minds, and they were like, green this, CO2 emission that, and what do I do to lower CO2 emissions? Drill bit companies were calling me and be like, I can lower emissions because I have less vibration. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you can't even quantify that. The upstream sector of lowering emissions is nothing. It's a drop in the damn bucket for global CO2 emissions. So it means nothing. So all this was chasing, you're throwing good money after bad. It was ridiculous. And Oxy, I've not been a fan of Vicky Halb's leadership. I don't like how she's apologetic to the world. I don't like how she goes to Davos and apologizes for producing oil and gas and has dinner with those folks. I just don't think that's good leadership in oil and gas. I think that, and she's really leaned into the CO2 emission stuff. Now, I'm a fan of using CO2 to flood and to increase oil output. So I think that there's a huge opportunity there. But for me as a taxpayer to pay her to sequester the carbon, just for kicks and giggles? No, I'm not a fan of it. I don't think it's good subsidy. I know lots of people in the industry love it. I am not a fan of it. Am I moving the needle on CO2 emissions? No. So I'm just sorry. I'm just not. So I don't think that this is just throw up big oil. That is big oil. So why should I be subsidized? But no, it's just not. It's not good. I'd rather they're making money from oil and gas, yet they have all the side business stuff. And I think every company did. They thought, okay, well, I need to get into all this green stuff because the market's telling me to, because I have all this ESG pressure, all this investor pressure. My investors are telling me to buy back shares. Buying back shares is not always the best thing to do. There's too much of it. At one time, we had people using debt to buy back shares. That wasn't appropriate, yet we did it. So we have to be very, very careful about investor pressure and listening to investors. And sometimes we need to be more like Chris Wright and just say, no, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. Chevron is doing a little bit more of that now. You saw them kind of lean into it and then they kind of pulled back out of it. And they said, we're going to produce oil and gas. I just think Exxon's kind of lost their messaging a little bit, Oxy included. And so they don't know, but they're not making money unless I haven't seen the books, but I don't they're making money from stable oil prices and putting the drill bit back in the ground. All of them are going to regret not producing more oil when oil prices were 80. All of them. I bet they're regretting it now. And because spending $2 billion as Exxon on green stuff that doesn't make money, that's not actually increasing your share price. That's just making you all your investor meetings and everything. So if you had a little more backbone and you just said, we're not actually doing it. We don't have, you want to invest in us, we're going to produce oil, we're going to produce energy. Companies will be able to do that now. And it will be very interesting. I've been telling people this for years. It will be very interesting to see how Exxon, Chevron, and Oxy handle that now and how publicly traded companies handle that now, given that the politics have changed and they don't have to do that. And I would say that the industry, to me, it's the most frustrating because people in the industry are proud to work in the industry. And I would like their CEOs to reflect that.
Exxon used to be an entity of engine number one.
Yep.
I don't know how active
they're still there. They made a big stink, and they have people on the board.
Right,
and they still talk their book. But engine number one will be out of fashion and not so favorable now as well.
Maybe that's why Woods is kind of mixed messaging just to
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, he didn't handle that debacle well at all. I mean, that was all May 21st of 2021. That was all when that happened with Chevron, happened with Shell, basically all within the same days. But that engine number one's premise was not correct. So if Exxon had the stamina to stand behind it, it was Blackstreet and Vanguard who pushed Exxon to bend the knee and take those board members. Well, Blackstreet and Vanguard, all these guys were all pushing the ESG stuff because they're selling that, right? They're getting money from the fees of pushing all this stuff. So very corrupt. It wasn't clean. It wasn't cool, and it wasn't it was just not as good as people think. And the whole premise of it was, hey, you are Exxon, you are producing oil and gas, and we're not going to need as much oil and gas in the future. So we need to get on your board so you can divest of oil and gas. That was an incorrect premise. That was not true.
Oil isn't going to increase.
They're a publicly traded company. They have a fiduciary responsibility to talk about the stuff that's going to make them money and to invest in that. And I think we, as investors, need to hold them accountable. You're an oil and gas company. I want you actually producing oil and gas. If you want to go do the other stuff, show me if it's profitable. But I don't really want oil and gas companies working on electricity and wind and solar when it doesn't make money and it doesn't actually make sense. If for some reason, they can make it make sense, I don't know. There's a lot of people that give me excuses on wind and solar. I have a hard time buying it. It's still coming from China. It's still coming from forced labor. It's still bad energy. I don't know.
Still mining.
Yeah, you're still mining to get it. There's a lot of components into it, and we didn't even talk about electric vehicles and all the critical minerals that go into that, and the mining that you need for that, and just this insanity. And at least in the U.S., will be the insanity. The pressure of the insanity we've taken that off the bottle cap.
You're talking about Oxy. They're going to be building a
Stratos.
That plant at Penwell to
Stratos?
pull CO2 out of the air.
Oh yeah.
The Stratos plant, is that what
Yeah, I
it's called?
think it's called that. Yep.
She would be out there off of
Yep.
340.
Yep.
Yeah, but they're going to use it to
What?
do flooding.
And they say the CO2
To do CO2 flooding.
Oh, doing what?
supply is
Yeah.
Executive
the
conference.
natural
Oh,
supply
nice.
is
Executive hard energy.
dropping.
executive
Oh,
conference.
nice. Yes, I'm sure she'll say
She
everything.
is the featured speaker.
Yes, I'm sure she'll say really
Doesn't sound that
amazing
efficient.
things too. Really just
Yeah.
move the audience.
So they
And
get the
that she
carbon
apologizes
from the
at least
air,
once about
CO2.
producing
and
oil
then
and
the
gas.
CO2 from there, and they make it into pellets.
And Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is that.
I think
She
they'll
was.
just
She
make
was
it
already.
into CO2 and
She
then
was already
just
that.
put it in a pipe.
No, she was. I don't know. It's interesting whether or not she, if she's a good executive or bad. I just haven't liked her apologetic tone. But she went crazy on Anadarko. People thought she was nuts, and it worked out. And so she made that work out.
It's something.
It's something, No, she did. I'm not. That was a ballsy move, and I
Yes.
give credit where credit is due.
Yes.
That was hard, and I don't know if everyone would have been able to do that. I've met her. She's a nice person. I just really, and she has been honest about federal permits. Like, hey, we can't re-up a federal permit. I just think you can't speak both sides out of your mouth. Okay, you can't say, hey, I can't get a federal permit, but also I'm sorry I'm in Europe and I'm sorry I'm producing oil and gas. No, you can't like stop apologizing for it. I produce oil and gas, you're consuming it, move on. And stop doing that. It's just I think that it really does weigh on the public market when you just don't have that leadership. And this emphasis on CO2, I mean, the injection to produce I think is huge. But let's say everybody leaned into the politics. The moment politics changes with Biden in office, she leaned in and said, oh my gosh, we're gonna have the lowest carbon barrel. Yeah. Well, if it matters with politics, then it means like that's not how I want investment to work, right? I want that to be separate from politics.
But you see the luster of the renewables kind of wearing off?
Oh yeah, it was wearing off a couple of years ago. And the only thing holding it up was kind of whether, the luster's definitely worn off because it's not making money. So I think you really talk about tailwinds and headwind shifting. It's definitely gone away. So the kittens and roses and daisies are falling apart for that. But I think it's also important for like carbon capture sequester companies that were built on these subsidies. They're losing the luster, and so that's sad because that was those are people's jobs. But anything that's 100% dependent on government subsidies is not a reliable business for the long term.
The real apology should be from the real apology should be from Shell.
What?
The real apology from Shell to say to their stakeholders, we apologize.
Yes.
We sold the Permian at discount.
Yeah.
Because
Shell.
we wanted to go to the electricity and solar and wind.
And I think that's the probably case in point of thinking like why Vicky Hullab and Darren Woods are probably not correct right now is that they must not be hearing what the CEO of Shell is saying right now. What the CEO of Total said right before the election. The CEO of Total was explaining to the market that, hey, the U.S. would be crazy not to be embracing, no matter who's in office, embrace oil and natural gas. Now, he was naive to think that Harris would have done that because she wasn't going to. But that it matters. So the fact that Darren was to say it didn't matter who was in office, he knew it did. And to say, like, the fact that we wouldn't embrace this, I mean, if Total can say that, like, you have to. This is what your benefit is as America. You have all this oil and gas, and you can embrace this. You can change your trajectory. You can change the world's trajectory. That he can say that. So you have seen a big pivot from BP, Shell, and Total. BP, obviously, the change of their CEO, keeping their interim CEO, and how they said and, not or. How it's and, like, we're at. I mean, that was a big deal. It should forget the and, but whatever. I'm okay with them. Like, they say, the fact that they have in the Financial Times in London is saying and, not or, we're going to produce oil and we're going to do this. That's a really big deal. Yeah. And you hear this in a taxi cab if you get in London. You hear the same thing, is that, hey, we like the energy transition, but we're not ready for it and it's too expensive. That's just a reality. They'll come to the conclusion that, hey, it's probably never going to work. Give them some time. But I mean, this is real stuff that's happening. And the fact that those CEOs can say it, and again, the fact that Chris Wright can say it, and that he's a publicly traded company, yes, they can do too, and they should be held accountable.
But also, other countries supposed to play this game, right? And like you said, China, they're cold. They don't care about CO2.
Well, no, they don't. And they're
Iran and Russia all together. That's a big market.
It is a big market.
They don't care.
They don't care. So
they just make money.
So if we say, well, we can list them as like they're not our friends, Iran, Russia, and China. I mean, Russia actually probably we have more in common with Iran or China. We should be working to kind of move them away from each other. But that's kind of a separate geopolitical thing. But China, no, they're an adversary, 100% an adversary. And if they're building everything off cheap coal and we're getting rid of our coal, that's a problem. So we have to be looking at the context of high energy prices and stable and reliable energy and realizing that that's the trajectory they're going. So we have to compete with that, which means you have to enable U.S. oil and natural gas. You have to stop decommissioning coal and you have to compete head on. And you have to also just lead and say things directly. China is not your friend. We shouldn't be buying the stuff from China. We shouldn't be buying the wind turbines from China. We shouldn't be buying the solar panels. And it's not okay to use forced labor. It's not okay to use, if we can't embrace coal, why are we letting them?
So does that mean, do you think it's going to shift towards made in the U.S.?
Over time, it depends on how the policies are implemented. If they do, you could, in theory, over time. And I was saying, like the guy I was talking to on the plane, we were talking about stuff made from China, and I said, well, hopefully 10 years from now, when I'm flying into the Permian, I don't hear that as much, because if we had done stuff that, Trump did change the trajectory on China from the previous administration, and I follow China very closely. I work on China a lot. And we have had 40 years of bad policy on China, of Henry Kissinger and Nixon really setting us up for failure and just getting completely duped by the Chinese. And so they give us nothing and we give them a lot in return. And so it's a very biased, unfair relationship, and so you just can't keep that trajectory. So Trump started shifting that. He got genocide labeled for the Uyghurs in China. There were some things, but you have to actually follow through with that, and we'll see how this shakes out. for China, and that's why I mentioned the China hawk thing. Is like we'll see how this shakes out, how they lead with this. But the trajectory for can you implement tariffs? Can you actually say we're embracing our natural gas and we want to embrace manufacturing? Auto manufacturing, that's pretty big. If I can get CEOs on board to say, hey, I'm going to give you access to natural gas, I'm going to work hard to lower your utility bills, and I want you to manufacture this here. I do think that. I think if you can give them clarity and a roadmap and you can incentivize them to produce here, plus if they know they're getting tariffs slapped on them, even from Mexico, they're already talking about it. I mean, the fact that you've got Taiwan Semiconductor already saying, hey, we're going to build more chips in America, you've got Ursula von der Leyen saying we're going to buy more natural gas. It's already happening. They already know that, and that's why he started out with the 60% tariffs the way he did, is because he wants the negotiating, and China's already there. Like, they're already saying we're willing to negotiate, but I think you need to be incentivizing companies to say we will do it here, and that's tricky because you have higher
How
prices.
does India play into all of this?
It's harder.
Yeah.
We want India to play into it, but India's a messy country.
They make money now.
Yeah,
They
but
sell Russian oil and gas, stamp it as made in India.
they buy cheap Russian oil and gas, and they don't like Russia and China super tight because that doesn't help India. India is a messier country than people want to believe. I mean, would love for them to be a nice rising middle power that's gonna put some pushback. But they've got, I mean, like, their coal's going nowhere. I mean, because it's entrenched, it's mafia owned. I mean, there's a lot of things that they won't get rid of that coal. They're not going to supplant China tomorrow with oil demand, but they have a lot of opportunity. They have a lot of growth there. There's a lot of potential there, and we have to craft sanctions and tariffs in a way that you would enable India. You would enable Europe, actually. Like, we should be enabling our allies to produce this stuff. And not just China slapping a Malaysia sticker on it and then sending it to here and getting around, tariffs. But that's what's largely been happening. So you have to enable it. You have to bring them into the fold. And I think you have to make sure you give, hey, our natural gas is ready for you. Let's help you build the infrastructure. But you need to know that you're going to have it for 20, 30, 40 years. So you can, because they're building their countries and their infrastructure on it.
Can I ask one more question?
Yep, and then I have to go because I need to head over to it.
Unless someone
Yeah.
else has a question, I don't want to take. I mean, again, I'm from Lebanon, and I have seen a lot of sanctions applied to countries around my country. Those sanctions work because Iran is selling through Dubai, Russia is selling through India. Those sanctions work.
Well, sanctions worked on Iran when they were enforced. So we saw crude exported out of Iran at the end of Trump's administration go down to in the hundreds of thousands of barrels a day, then they increase. So when Biden came into office, Iran and China both knew that they were not going to enforce sanctions. So they didn't even listen to them. And they just, because everyone in the Biden administration, even before they came in, just like everybody knows what things are happening now with Trump, they knew that with Biden too, is that Biden wanted to get a deal with Iran. So China and Iran knew that they could increase crude flows. So if you don't enforce sanctions, that's kind of a moot point. They don't work perfectly. I don't love them. They're not perfect. And Obama really leaned into sanctions, but he was able to do that because we had this crude production. If you enforce them, if you say, no, Iran, you can't export this crude, and China, we're not going to let you take it. Enforce them, yes, has a huge impact. That is all of Iran's economy. So I can hurt Iran quickly by enforcing the sanctions on their crude. No, I don't want in the JCPOA. No, I don't want them to have nuclear power generation. I want to hurt Iran. I want to kick them while they're down, and I want to turn the knife because Iran screws their people over. And all this is all everybody talks about this hurting the people. This is hurting the Iranian government. I want the people of Iran to thrive and flourish, but Iran's not going to give that.
People of the Middle East, not only Iran.
But when it comes to Russia, those sanctions were not crafted well to begin with. They were all BS. If you're letting Russia export all that crude and you're just moving that around the world, you're not, you got a discount to your crude. Keep waging your war. We'll keep giving you the money for that. That is a bunch of pansies in the West saying, I don't want high oil prices. I'm not willing to deal with that pain. And so I'm not going to actually sanction them. So you have a bunch of people in Europe who are pretending that they don't consume crude oil, who don't want to sanction Russia and actually deal with the problem. When you actually deal with an adversary in the future where we actually might have a real conflict with kinetic war with China, it will be different, and sanctions won't work the same. But China is doing the thing right now where they're trying to prepare for sanctions. That's why they're putting up gold. That's why they're stockpiling oil. That's why they're doing all this, because they're preparing for potentially secondary sanctions or just insulating. Like, they're preparing for all kinds of worst case scenarios, and just that also gives them great flexibility. If they want to get more aggressive, then they know, okay, I'm more insulated on this. I can do stuff. So they've learned a lot. But you're right, they don't work well. But when it comes to Iran, just enforce them. So if I don't enforce any, and then those sanctions on Russia were all BS to begin with. The fact that even now we're still adding sanctions means we should have thrown everything in the kitchen sink day one, and it didn't really impact their economy, and they're still waging this war. So no, they didn't work.
Well, I hope that they will be enforced in Iran. I hope that so much.
Yeah. Well, I'm not as concerned about that. I think that's
good.
I think that because that's one of the oil levers of like bringing Saudi back in and everything. I think it's, if you want to support oil price a little bit, you sanction Iran.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Trisha.
Yes.